Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Very busy day today here in the studio. We actually have two guests in town from Australia, two Australian members of parliament who are here to advocate for the release of Julian Assange. We're going to talk to them. We also have a presidential candidate coming in studio, Will Hurd. We're going to talk to him about how he sees the race and the dominance of Trump within the Republican Party and within the Republican primary, certainly. We also have big news about Ukraine, updates on Zelensky's visit here. We've got updates on that UAW strike that we want to bring to you. We also have some really interesting data about the way special elections have been going across the country, really painting a very different picture than the polls are painting, so we'll dig into that. Saagar is looking at a January 6th conviction, and I am looking at Ben Shapiro's commentary on the UAW strike, so a lot to get to this morning. Very exciting show.
That's right. We wanted to thank everybody again for people who've been signing up, premium subscribers. We've got an awesome interview that Jordan Cheriton did with Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, about the strike, as well as some footage that he's been able to get from the strike itself. We're partnering with Jordan on that. Your hard-earned money is helping support some of this on-the-ground journalism. We're very proud to be able to bring that type of interview, that coverage, again, that we've been doing. And so this is an important part of our show and what you are signing up for. So breakingpoints.com, if you are able to. It really helps us to be able to support partners, creators like that, and to be able to bring this to a wide audience. We're really proud of the fact that some of our UAW coverage and more has gotten more ratings, than any other subject that we have done, which is why we get up in the morning. That's why we do the show.
Yeah, we were really excited to get to partner with Status Quo on that. And by the way, guys, give them some love too. Sign up and become members for them as well, because they do a lot of great on-the-ground reporting.
Yeah.
And I mean, they broke a lot of news this trip, both in talking to the workers. We've got some video for you that's exclusive for us about how they feel about this whole Trump coming into town and Joe Biden's speech and whether he's going to go to the picket line, and that interview with Sean Fain where he also broke some news. So thank you guys so much for supporting us and making all of that happen.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get to Ukraine. So President Zelensky, the schedule changed up a little bit. He is coming to town here today on Thursday. He's going to be meeting with the full Senate and with the House as the actual Ukraine funding is on a knife's edge, as well as a complete government shutdown. But some of Zelensky's comments are certainly getting eyed at, not only at the United Nations, but in Poland. We're going to dig into all of that. By coming to the U.S., he's inadvertently ignited multiple diplomatic crises. The first at the UN, calling for the removal of Russia from the UN Permanent Security Council and for a policy of denuclearization against the state. Let's take a listen.
Ukraine gave up its third largest nuclear arsenal. The world then decided Russia should become a keeper of such power. Yet history shows it was Russia who deserved nuclear disarmament the most back in 1990s. And Russia deserves it now. Terrorists have no right to hold nuclear weapons. No right.
No right to hold nuclear weapons. So that is the policy that we've pursued against North Korea now for what, 40 some odd years. Ask somebody how it's worked out for them. But really what that is an explicit call for regime change. And that is the question of, is that what we support now? I mean, is that what the end goal of this war is to complete not only a regime change in Russia, but to subjugate Russia in order to take away their nuclear weapon status? I mean, this was not even, Krystal, the dream of the most Cold War hawks in the 1990s. Like, even then, it was understood by the Clinton administration, by the Bush administration, others, like, listen, we have to make sure that we're not creating a situation where we're like occupying the country, taking nukes away, taking any ability for them to have any sort of sovereignty or national pride. I mean, he's effectively advocating for that at the United Nations. And that's why it is a stunning comment. He also, funnily enough, wants to swap Russia and Germany for permanent UN Security Council status. For those who don't know, the UN Security Council was, created after the World War II with the victors of World War II, and the idea being that these have a permanent objection, the ability to veto at the UNSC. Of course, there's lots of questions about whether that should stand or not. It's not like it particularly matters because the UN has all that much power. But I thought that the most significant call that he made there was for outright regime change in Russia as apparently one of the Ukrainian end goals. And in a way, I appreciate that. It's like, yeah, we should know exactly what they are working towards or what they want. And the question is does the United States, does Biden support this aim
that President Zelensky pointed? At the beginning of the war,
he said it.
Some people were out in the administration were outright saying it. Now, we haven't heard that directly for a long time. It's hard to conclude that there's any other goal, though, when you see the nature of our escalating level of support. Certainly, I don't know if they are so fanciful to imagine at this point that I think there was some wish casting at the beginning that Putin's regime might just collapse without doing a whole lot, that they could easily weaken it, that it would fall apart, that they could, prop up whoever they hoped would be the successor, which we have always said, careful what you wish for, because it may seem like it can't get worse than Putin, but trust me, it 100% could get worse than Putin. So we always were, concerned about what could happen in the event that that was even a possibility. But it seems very unlikely at this point. I mean, there have been protests in favor of peace and against the war in Russia. Those have basically all fizzled out. You haven't seen a mass public revolt there. You had this one weird sort of semi-coup attempt that obviously has been dealt with and neutralized, to put it kindly, at this point. So there's no sign that the regime is like in imminent danger of collapse. So perhaps they don't delude themselves into thinking that anymore. But it does beg the question, like, okay, what is the end game? And I would like to see more direct commentary from our own president, because as you said, Zelensky certainly willing to put it out there. The other thing, listen, I would love to see worldwide global nuclear disarmament. I am not so foolish as to think that we are on the brink of that happening, and I certainly don't support, any sort of one-sided direction. And he also seems to indicate that, like, oh, actually, Ukraine should have kept the nukes.
Oh,
and, and Russia should have gotten rid of them.
That would have been way better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so at the same time, President Zelensky here, he's got his hat out. He's coming to Washington today, asking for $25 billion more from the United States. And as part of that, he's been giving a lot of interviews. I've been keeping my eye very closely for the case that he's making to American lawmakers. And in the latest one, let's put this up there, during a CNN interview with Wolf Blitzer, he says, quote, "We are on the finishing line. I'm sure of that." Now, I really zeroed in on this because this is just a completely dishonest way of asking us for more money, Krystal. They need to be much more frank and honest about where the war is, just to give everybody an idea. I always talk about the map. Let's actually look at it. Let's put this up there here on the screen. This is from the counteroffensive. Now, what you can see in red is held by Russia. That's approximately 20% of all of Ukraine. What you can see in blue are the Ukrainian counteroffensive gains. Now, that black rectangle, for those who are watching, in the left side of the screen, Krystal, that was the goal of the counteroffensive, to go all the way from where that tiny little shaded area of blue is to the Sea of Azov, and to split the Russian defensives and to make a breakthrough against the entire defensive line. As you can see quite clearly from that, billions of dollars of weapons, who knows, untold hundreds of thousands wounded or dead, has got us the colored in blue shade line. That is, by any military definition, the starting line of said counteroffensive. It is not even close to the finishing line. If they were, even halfway through, I guess you could, exaggerate and say that's the case. I also think it fits with something that happened yesterday. There was an all-Senate briefing by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the intelligence community, and others. And Senator Josh Hawley, who attended that briefing, had this to say. This happened late last night, so we don't have the element. Quote, "If there is a path to victory in Ukraine, I did not hear it today. I heard there was going to be no end to funding requests. This latest request, for what it is, $24 billion, is not the end. Quote, they made that very clear. It is not close to the end. I would say we were basically told, buckle up and get out your checkbook." So U.S. policymakers have made the case to Congress. They are not saying what Zelensky's saying. They're like, no, this is going to be the first of many. This is just the first quarter. We're not, and don't forget that whenever the Biden administration requested that another $24 billion, they said this is just one of quarterly requests that will be forthcoming. So if we are to then annualize that, we are talking about $100 billion per year. $100 billion, again, is the same amount that we took 20 years to disperse to the entire Afghan National Security Forces through our entire time in Afghanistan. It's an extraordinary amount of money. And then relative to the gains that the Ukrainians are making, you cannot by any means say that this $24 billion or whatever is going to make, let's say, like a difference beyond marginal in what the gains are that are being said. And behind closed doors, that's what they're admitting. That's what they're admitting to our lawmakers.
These wars take on a sort of endless circular logic, where, the idea before the counteroffensive was, okay, we're gonna fund them, we're gonna equip them, they're gonna have this counteroffensive, and then maybe we can get to the table and they'll be in a stronger negotiating position. Now the logic is, since the counteroffensive didn't go well, we've got to keep funding them so they can try again and get a stronger position before they get to the negotiating table. It doesn't matter what really happens on the battlefield. There's always a logic in favor of continuing the conflict. And we've seen a number of, media sort of planted reports that have helped to attempt to seed the ground and to plant the seeds of this is just going to go on and on and on. So at the same time, put this next piece up on the screen from the Wall Street Journal. They have a good report here about how Zelensky's trip to Washington this time has a much different tone and character than the trip last time, which, he spoke to a joint session of Congress, and it was very sort of there was a lot of grandiosity around it. It was very assertive. This time he's going to be meeting privately behind closed doors with lawmakers, including, they say, some Republicans who want to grill him over a slow-moving counteroffensive and Ukraine's use of American assistance. This comes, of course, at a time right now when the Republicans are looking to shut down the government. They can't come to an agreement within their own caucus about what they want funding levels to be, and part of the disagreements revolve around aid to Ukraine. Now, there's a lot of reporting about how much the tenor and the tone has shifted in Washington. I would just say, keep in mind that in terms of elite elected politicians on the Republican side, you still have an overwhelming majority in favor of continuing aid to Ukraine. In the Republican caucus, you maybe have a third of the House Republican caucus that is at least in favor of reducing aid or not going forward with aid at all. So even within the Republican caucus in the House, you only have about a third that objects to continuing the direction that we have been going. So I do think some of the journalists, some of the writing coming out of D.C. about this big split and how some of the Ukrainian aid is really in danger and, it's on the precipice, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a little bit overstated, just given the numbers that are still overwhelmingly in favor of continuing aid to Ukraine.
Yes, you're right. I spoke with some my Capitol Hill sources, and effectively what they're saying is look, we're going to fight as hard as we can. These are the people who are against adding aid, but here's the truth. It's the #1 establishment priority, and they're they will move heaven and earth to get this money through Congress. Now, I will say I would put it at a 10% chance that it doesn't pass, only for this reason. McCarthy has got an issue. They're facing a potential government shutdown. So to avert that shutdown, he probably has to work with Democrats. Well, if the Democrats work with him, they're likely to mandate or want Ukraine aid as part of that.
Right.
Well, that would give then the political power to some of the Matt Gaetz Republicans in the Freedom Caucus to call the motion to vacate on the speaker and to replace him as speakership. So he could put his own political future ahead of that. There's another option that happens. They reach some sort of CR deal, continuing resolution, where they do fund the government, they leave Ukraine aid out of that, and it passes potentially at some later date. But then the question is that could the House and this contingent actually move forward to try and remove said aid? Then they could also pass this continuing resolution. The Senate could vote it down and say, no, we're not going to fund the government at all unless you put in said Ukraine aid, and there's a late night vote that actually adds it on at the very last minute. My point is that there is a little bit of uncertainty, and there was also some inkling of this just this morning that happened. Multiple GOP lawmakers, both senators and House of Representatives, sent a letter to the Office of Management and Budget where they rejected the request for 24 billion and asked specifically about what the actual end game is by the Biden administration, saying we will not vote for this until we receive a real strategic plan from the administration about this aid, about in the future. Senator Rand Paul vowing to hold up any procedural event that leads to more voting for Ukraine. So as you said, 90% chance I think it will pass. Absolutely 90%. But there's a lot of chaos, so you never know. You never know.
The other thing that just to clarify, I think the government is going to shut down. I mean, I think there's very little chance that it's not going to. There was a report in Politico Playbook, which is, the insider rag, whatever, about how Democrats are not even planning a contingency for it to not shut down. Like, there is no game plan in place from either side to avoid a government shutdown at this point. Republicans in the House caucus, they thought maybe they had this deal between the House Freedom Caucus and mainstream Republicans, is that what they call themselves?
Yes.
Anyway, the more moderate caucus within the Republican grouping, and that whole thing completely fell apart. So, and that hadn't, that was separate and apart from Ukraine funding. That was just on, the other budget spending levels. That completely fell apart. So even within the House Republican conference, they can't agree on a continuing resolution to pass. And that's before you even start talking about the Democrats in the Senate or the Republicans even in the Senate. That's before you start talking about the White House. So it's very hard to see how they avoid a government shutdown at this point. And it's also very hard to see how McCarthy does anything at any point, even after the government shutdown, without working with Democrats, which is why I think it's very unlikely that you don't end up with this next tranche of aid to Ukraine. Because if he's having to work with Democrats anyway, he, and by the way, 2/3, majority of his caucus overwhelmingly are in favor of continuing Ukraine aid. So I don't know how this is all going to work out specifically, but it seems like they're probably going to have to make some kind of a deal with the Democrats after the government has already shut down and after some pain has already been exacted on, not just the federal government, but the American people. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I just, I wouldn't get I don't want you guys to get your hopes up that there's going to be some real significant change here in the direction, because in terms of the elected officials here in Washington, they're still overwhelmingly in support on both sides of the aisle of continuing the present direction. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.